Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to be creating 3 different cards and I'm going to be using the new best friend stamp set and using this girl image as the main image on all 3 of our cards. We're going to alter the stamped image a bit and we're going to take that puppy out of her arms and change it for 3 different items. So we're going to be using the Happy Hippo stamp set to give her a birthday cake. We're going to be using the Jingle All the Way stamp set to give her a Christmas tree. And we're also going to be using the coffee date stamp set to give her a big cup of coffee to carry. So I've already went ahead and stamped out all of the images that we're going to need for our 3 cards. So I have the girl image stamped 3 times, and then I also have each of those items I mentioned earlier stamped onto a separate piece of cardstock. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to color this first girl image with my Copic markers. Now I'm going to color all 3 of the girls with the same color hair and the same skin color, as well as the same color leggings and boots. The only thing I'm going to change is the color of her sweater to kind of match the little item that we're going to put in her arms to match the card design that we're going to create. So there is quite a bit of coloring at the beginning of this video, so I am going to leave all that in because I know some of you like to watch the coloring of the images. I'm just going to throw on some music while I do the coloring, and I'm going to speed it up a bit just to kind of save a little bit of time. If you don't care to watch the coloring, you can definitely jump ahead and see how I put all of the cards together. But for right now, I'm just going to go through and color all of the images. And like I mentioned, I'm going to keep the girls pretty similar. I'm going to keep the same hair, boots, and skin. And then I'm just going to change up the colors of their sweaters. Now you will notice when I'm coloring this one here that I have the dog image there and I just kind of colored over the sides of him. We're going to cut him completely out of this image when we're done with all the coloring, so I'm not worried at all about having any color on him. And then I'm going to color those separate images on the other cardstock piece as well, and then we will meet back here and we'll put the cards together. Okay, so now we're wrapping up the coloring. So we have all of our girl images as well as our little pieces here that she's going to carry. And I'm just going to take my scissors now and I'm going to fussy cut all of these images. That's the main thing here when you're doing this technique where we're going to kind of change up what she's holding, is it doesn't really work that well to use the dies because we don't want that small white border around the images. So it does take a little bit of time to cut everything out, but I definitely think it's worth it to be able to change her up and kind of make her work on different cards for different occasions. So I cut out the Christmas tree, the birthday cake, and the coffee cup right along the inked lines, and now I'm moving on and cutting out the girl images. She takes a little bit longer for sure just because she has a lot more parts to her to cut out, but I just wanted to show this part here where I'm cutting her out, where the dog is, because we don't need him in the final cutout piece of the girl since we are removing that image from the stamp design. So I'm just cutting around this, making sure to fully cut out her arm and her hand. The first time I did this, I actually cut her hand right off, so I had to kind of surgically put it back on when I assembled the card. But this time I remembered and I made sure to leave her hand intact. And then I just cut around the sweater area where we can still see the dog, but we're going to cover that up, so not to worry. Now for her actual arm, we want to take our scissors and we want to cut along the stamped line of her arm. So you can see there I took my scissors and cut all the way up almost to her armpit. And then I'm going to do the same on the top of her arm. I want to cut a nice slit through there. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to take our second image there that we've created and we can tuck it underneath of her arm. Now, the kind of thing you want to keep in mind here when you're doing this with this girl image is we need to be able to cover up her face where you can see the dog is still licking her. And we also need to be able to cover her sweater where we can see the dog's foot. We can't really cut those parts of the images out since they kind of form her. So we want to be able to cover those up with our image. Now on the dog's nose, you might see there I have a little bit of color. And what I did is I added skin color there because if you kind of place this here, it almost looks like her other ear because this image here isn't quite long enough to cover both the bottom area and the top area. So by having that skin color on there, it's making it look like it's an actual ear rather than the dog's nose. So anyone who hasn't seen the actual stamp set will never know the difference. So what I'm going to do before I assemble everything together is I'm going to take a black marker and I'm going to go around all of the edges of these cutout images. And the reason I'm doing this is because they're stamped on white cardstock. So when we cut them out with our scissors, we end up with that white core kind of showing around the edges. And by adding this black marker, it just really gives the edges a really finished look and just ties everything together really nicely. So now I've kind of jumped ahead and you can see I have both of my girl images cut out. I've cut them out the exact same way. And now I'm going to assemble the rest of these. So I'm going to take the other pieces that I had cut out and tuck them right underneath of her arm like I did with the first one. Now for the birthday cake, it's pretty easy because it's nice and large, so it covers both the top and bottom of the dog so I don't have to worry. I did make sure to tilt this a little bit though so it doesn't look like the candles are going to catch her hair on fire. And then I just tuck that in there and then we can adhere it together. The Christmas tree is the same as the cake. It's a nice size, so it fully covers all of the elements. You just want to make sure you angle it just right so that it covers up the bottom part as well as the top part and completely conceals that dog image underneath. And then once you have it adhered, no one will ever know that that was actually a dog image before we added these little pieces in here. So these are all of the three girls. I just love the different effects that you can create with them. I had so much fun kind of dressing them up and changing what they were holding. And you can definitely come up with even more ideas for different things that she can hold. As long as it covers the areas on the stamped image that you don't want visible, then anything would pretty much work here. So I'm taking a white gel pen now and adding a little bit of dot detail to the girl's sweater who's holding the coffee, and then also I added some dot and line detail to the birthday cake just to kind of dress it up a bit. And now I'm going to assemble these into cards. Now I decided to keep the actual cards pretty simple because we did do a lot of coloring and the main part I really wanted to show was how I altered the images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Stitch Strip Dynamics, and this is a really fun one because it kind of has all of these wonky stitches, but it doesn't actually cut through your cardstock panel. So it just kind of adds a really nice textured look to the background. And I'm going to add this to all three of these white cardstock panels. So I've cut the three cardstock panels to 4 inches by 5 1/4, which is just slightly smaller than an A2 size card base. And I ran all three of these through my die cutting machine with that stitch die. So you can see now I have that really great detail along the bottom, and I'm going to use that area there to kind of anchor each of the different girl images. I've also created card bases for all three, and we'll kind of assemble everything together once I get the sentiments stamped on. So for the girl with the coffee, I'm using the Coffee Break Sentiment Stamp Set, and I'm stamping the sentiment, "I love you more than coffee," onto an essential speech bubble die that I've cut out with white cardstock. For her, I decided I wanted to have her positioned at the bottom area on the stitch lines and then add that little speech bubble above her. So I'm adding this panel directly to my card base. So for her, I'm using a blue raspberry card base. This is top folding and measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I'm just adhering the panel directly to that card base. And then I'm going to adhere the girl right onto the card, no dimension at all. I want to keep her completely flat against the card. And I'm going to adhere her right over those stitch lines. Now I don't want her to look like she's floating in space, but I don't really want to add a lot more detail to the card. I want to keep it nice and clean and simple. So what I'm going to do is just take a Copic marker and I'm just going to add a little bit of light shading underneath of her boots. And this is just going to kind of ground the image and kind of give her something to stand on so it looks a little bit more grounded in the overall design. And then once I have that little area kind of colored underneath of her, I'm going to use foam adhesive to put her little speech bubble above her. So I'm just going to cut a strip of foam adhesive that's going to fit nicely in behind that speech bubble. And then I'm just going to add it on there and then position this right above her. And then that is going to finish all of the die cut pieces that we're going to add to this card design. Now we can move on to the birthday cake girl. So I'm going to pretty much do the exact same thing except change it up a tiny bit. I'm going to use this "It's Time to Celebrate with Cake" sentiment. And I'm going to once again stamp it with black ink. I'm going to stamp this one directly underneath of those stitch lines. So I'm going to kind of move her out of the way so I can line everything up. Then I'm just going to stamp it directly onto this panel. She's going to be positioned kind of almost like she's standing on top of the sentiment, but once again, I didn't want to kind of have her floating in space, so I'm very carefully going to add just a tiny bit of shading. You do want to be careful here because the ink that I stamped the sentiment with is not Copic friendly, so if you hit it at all with the Copic markers, it will make that ink bleed. So you just want to be careful to stay above this sentiment stamp there. And then I'm just going to adhere her to the card. And once again, I didn't use any foam adhesive. I kept her completely flat on the card design. And then I'm just going to adhere the finished panel to this top folding card base, which is a ripe raspberry card base. I thought it looked nice with the sweater color that we used on this image. I really like the idea of doing cards like this where we kind of have this one image that we've changed up, but we're keeping the card designs almost similar, just changing up the colors and a little bit of the design. So for the very last one here now, this is a Christmas card. So I'm going to use this Season's Greeting stamp set to add a little bit of a scripty font to the card design. So I'm stamping this one with black ink once again, but this time I'm going up above the stitch lines. I really like how it has that greetings at the bottom, which is a nice straight font. So it's easy to line that up with a straight edge underneath and then have the really scripty font up top. Once again, I'm going to adhere this to a top folding card base. And for this one here, I'm using electric red to match her sweater. And then I'm going to adhere her on top of this. Now for this one, I did decide to give her a little bit of dimension, so I've completely covered that die cut with foam tape. And I'm just going to adhere her on the same side on the right there, and just kind of overlap her a tiny bit onto that sentiment, just to kind of bring it all together. And then once again, I'm going to use a Copic marker to add some shading underneath of her feet, just to ground her on this card design so she doesn't look like she's floating. And then once I have this shading done, we have finished this card design, and now we have three completely different cards that use the same girl image on all three of them. So we have a birthday card, we have just a friend card that says I love you more than coffee, and then we also have a Christmas card. So we've completely changed this up and made it look completely different on all three cards. Now I did decide we kept them pretty simple, so I did want to add a little bit of detail and dimension to each of them. So I did add some jewels to all three of the cards. For the birthday card, I used some iridescent jewels just because they really pick up other colors around them. So I find they have a really nice kind of pink look to them and match the card base and her sweater really nicely. For the coffee one, I used some aqua ones and they match nicely to her sweater. And then for the Christmas card, I decided just to go with completely clear ones and added those all around that image as well. And then that is going to complete all three of our cards, and now we have this great card design that features 3 different occasions with one stamp set. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and will give this a try. It's a lot of fun to kind of look through all of your stamps and pick out different ones that will work with this image. Thanks so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you in another one soon.